So if we've left a toxic relationship, we can often get hit with just a wall of grief. And that wall of grief can sometimes seem insurmountable. So today I'm going to be talking about how to deal with this grief after a toxic relationship. I'm going to share some tips, I'm going to share some tools, I'm going to talk about the gifts that grief can bring. So I would not wish grief on anyone, but if you're already going through it, there are some silver linings that can come from grief. So here's the deal with a toxic relationship. Even if the relationship was toxic, even if it was abusive, even if there was really nothing good about it, usually there is still grief that comes up when that relationship ends. It's still a loss. Even if the relationship was really unhealthy, there's still something that you're losing. Maybe it's companionship. Maybe it was the dream of what the relationship could be. Maybe it was just the fact that you had a partner, even if that partner wasn't that good. So a lot of people can think, well, this relationship was so bad, I'm supposed to just feel totally fine. I'm supposed to feel free. I'm supposed to feel happy. No, there is almost always some sadness, some loneliness, some fear. And all of those things are combined to form this grief that can come up, this feeling of loss. So if you're experiencing this, know that this is completely normal. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean you want to get back with this person. You're experiencing the normal loss of something significant in your life. And like I said, even if the relationship was so bad, it was so toxic, there's still a loss. So there's almost always a grieving process that you're going to go through when the relationship ends. Really, the only exception would be if you've kind of already gone through that grieving process when you're in the relationship. Sometimes you can get to the end and be like, all right, you know what, I'm fine. But usually that's not the case. Usually there is some grieving that you have to go through. It's the case for me also. So I'm curious if you guys have experienced this as well. Have you gone through, or are you currently going through some grief at the loss of a toxic relationship or an abusive relationship? Let me know in the comments, I'm curious. So there's also an emotional attachment that you're grieving at the end of that relationship, maybe even including a trauma bond. So please don't think that if you're feeling grief, sadness, there's something wrong with you. Again, you are experiencing the normal loss of a relationship. You're experiencing the loss of an attachment. Even if that attachment to someone was really unhealthy, it was really toxic, there's still grief that's going to come up. Because sometimes it can almost feel shameful. Like we're not supposed to be feeling sad because the relationship was so bad, and the messages we can get are, your life is going to be so much better now that we've left the toxic relationship. But there is that transition where there is still sometimes an extreme amount of sadness, grief, depression. So I'm going to start by sharing some tips for how to get through this grief. And I want to preface this by saying, there is nothing wrong with grief. If anyone's giving you the message that grief is a problem or something that you shouldn't be having, don't listen to them. So all of this is under the umbrella of grief is a normal, natural process when it comes to healing from the loss of any relationship, but most importantly, a toxic relationship. So my first tip for how to deal with this grief is to be incredibly gentle with yourself. So what do I mean by being gentle with yourself? So I'll share what worked for me. So when I was going through this really intense period of grief, and my grief was really intense because it was 2 breakups. I was actually grieving the loss of a almost 10-year marriage, 15-year relationship, on top of a breakup of an abusive relationship with someone narcissistic. So it was really intense at that time. So I was just so gentle with myself, meaning I rested a lot. Because here's the thing, grief actually takes a lot of energy. So to feel an emotion, to allow it to process through us, that takes energy. So when we're grieving, there's a lot of emotion coming through us. There's a lot of energy that's being processed. So it's energy consuming. It takes a lot of energy. It can be very draining. And so what I did was I took a lot of naps. When I needed to rest, I did it. I let myself do it as much as was possible at that time. I also took a lot of baths because I personally found those very healing, like salt baths. I made my comfort a priority, and that can be really helpful to get through grief. I almost thought of myself like a small child that I had to take care of. Like I was the parent, and this grief that was moving through me was the part of me that I had to be so gentle with and take care of. So I didn't push myself to do too many things that I didn't absolutely have to do. Like I did what I had to do. I did work. I did what I had to do to get through life, to survive. But beyond that, I really let myself just take a break. I let myself rest when I needed to. I watched movies that made me feel comfortable, not ones that were triggering, not like these love stories that were going to trigger my grief even more, but just stories that made me feel good, like feel good stories, things like that. I was just really, really gentle with myself. And so that can help a lot too, because we don't want to suppress the emotions. We don't want to pretend they're not there. We want to help ourselves move through them. So whatever you can do to bring comfort to yourself, to be gentle with yourself, to treat yourself well, that's going to help you to get through that grief. So my second tip for getting through the grief, I touched on this a second ago, is to let yourself feel it. Now, I know this can sometimes seem like advice that's contrary to a lot of what's out there, which is like to just keep going, like just get back out there and start dating again, or just keep moving. Sometimes that can be helpful, but that tends to make us suppress the grief. And that is one thing that we do not want to do, because that suppressed grief can make it so much easier to get sucked back into another toxic relationship. Anything that we haven't actually processed out, anything that we haven't let ourselves feel and heal from, that contributes to that dynamic where toxic relationships feel familiar. So we never want to suppress this stuff and pretend it's not there. And I know that saying this is so much easier said than done. Grief can be very uncomfortable to feel. And you guys, I know more than anyone what this is like to feel. But if we try to ignore the pain, if we try to pretend it's not there, it will actually stay with us longer. So the more that we can allow it, the more that we can let the tears come up when they're there, just let them flow, let them out, we're actually going to be getting through that grieving process much faster. So I'm remembering there were times where I just needed to be at home to let myself cry. And I know that might sound very sad and that might sound very depressing, but it was actually the best thing for me. Because what happened was I let the emotion flow. I let it release from my system. And then after that happened, I felt better. I felt lighter. I felt like I had let go of my exes on a deeper level. So my point here is that suppressing or pretending the grief is not there, or trying to distract yourself from it, that actually is not helpful for you in the long run. It's more helpful to let yourself dive into it. And I know that can seem so scary, and I know it can seem like if you dive into it, if you dip your toe in it, it's going to be endless. The pain will never stop, the tears will never stop. But I can promise you that's not actually true. There is an end point to it. One day, the pain will not be there anymore. The tears will stop. You will have truly moved on. So the best thing you can do is to surrender to it, to let yourself be sad and feel this stuff. So the next tip to deal with the grief after a toxic relationship is to understand that grief doesn't look the same for everybody all the time. So what does this mean? Grief can trigger a lot of different emotions. Loss can trigger a lot of different emotions. It doesn't always look like sadness. Sadness is usually going to be there at some point, but very often it can look like anger. It can look like anxiety. It can look like fear. And it can look like loneliness, or this feeling of being really alone. And so any of those emotions that come up are perfectly normal and valid. So if you're feeling anger, that is perfectly okay. Allow yourself to feel that. It will eventually process out. So what I want to make sure here is that you guys know that any emotion that's coming up is okay, it's valid, it's a normal part of the grieving process. There's something called the cycles of grief, the stages of grief. I can't remember who first created that, but there's an idea that there's different stages of loss and grieving that people go through. And in different stages, they're feeling different emotions. I think in the beginning, it's like shock, then it moves to anger, then it moves to sadness. And so there's different waves that we can go through. So allowing all of those waves to process through you will also help for that grief to pass much more easily than if we're trying to not have certain emotions, especially if you guys are into spirituality, if you're into the new wave of spirituality. I always have a lot of things to say about that, but there's a lot of ideas in those circles that certain emotions are not going to be helpful for your healing. They're not going to be helpful for you to have a healthy relationship. Like, we have to have this high vibration where we're not feeling these emotions of maybe anger, resentment, sadness, and that is not true. What's actually going to help us to get to the place where we can have a healthy relationship is to feel these things and let them go. If we're pretending they're not there, if we're trying to ignore them and have this higher vibrational state, that's not actually going to serve you in the long run. What will serve you is to release them, to heal them. And then you can get to that place of neutrality where you're feeling pretty good, or some of what they would call the higher vibrational energies. The next tip for getting through this grief, this is my most important tip here. Get support. Get support. I will say this all day long. This is the most important thing you can do. The reason why I say this is because grieving alone, without talking to anyone, without getting any support, without having someone you can just call up and say, I'm having a hard day. I'm just feeling really sad. I'm feeling really in it. If we don't have that, grieving can be extremely isolating, and it can lead to depression. Nothing wrong with depression, but what we're trying to avoid here is getting to the place where it's just so hard for us to function, where we just really can't even do the things that we need to do to stay healthy and to survive. And so getting support so you're not alone in your grieving process makes such a big difference. So I always say, if you're in the thick of this grief, get as much support as you can. I say throw the book at it. Talk to a coach, get into therapy, go to a support group, talk to your friends, talk to your family, lean on the people in your life for support. The more support you can get, the easier it's going to be for you to go through this healing process. So get as much support as you can. The reason why, again, getting support is so important is because if you're doing it in isolation, you can tend to lose the will to move forward. That's normal when we're going through a grieving process, to kind of lose some of our desire to move forward temporarily. But if we're isolated and we're alone, that can go on for a long time. And that's where we don't want to go. We don't want to go to the place where we just feel like we've lost the will to live. Grieving with support can actually be transformative. It can lead to tremendous shifts in our personal growth. And so it's again so important to get help. And I don't care where you get it from. I would love to help you, but if it doesn't feel like I'm the right person for you, get help from anywhere else that you can. It really, really makes a huge difference. One of the things that can prolong grief, one of the things that can keep it going are subconscious blocks. For example, if you believe no one will love you, if you believe, like I did, that you're not good enough, those things can actually prolong grief more than they need to. Another thing that can keep grief going are some of these suppressed emotional energies that might be going on. Maybe because in the moment we didn't feel fully safe to feel the depth of sadness that we felt, and so we pushed it underground. Maybe we didn't feel we were allowed to. Maybe we didn't feel it was the right thing to do. So there's all these emotions that are suppressed there that are prolonging this grief. So instead of it just coming up and out in a short amount of time, it's just like simmering there for a while, and we can just feel this really profound sense of sadness, and that can carry on for a long, long time. Also, if our breakup has triggered things like abandonment from our past, that can prolong this grieving process. If it triggered some grief from our childhood that we hadn't fully processed, that can also prolong this grieving process. So there's a lot of different subconscious things that can be going on that are extending the grieving process more than it would ordinarily if there was nothing from our past that was being triggered. So for this reason, I have a brand new program that I created. It's called the X Detox. I created this program specifically to address the subconscious issues that can come up in this grieving process that are prolonging it unnecessarily. So I help you reprogram any of the negative beliefs that might be coming up, like that you're not good enough or that no one will love you, so that you can love yourself and be able to move forward much more easily. So I also help you release any of the negative energies that, again, might be prolonging the grieving process and making it last more than it would if it was just about the breakup. Because usually it's not. If we've had toxic relationships, usually there's stuff from our past that is contributing to what is going on in our grieving process today. I've created this program. It's 3 weeks, really affordable. Again, click on the link in the video if you want to learn more about it. You will get 3 one-on-one energy healing sessions with me. So in a lot of programs that people offer, there's group healing sessions. These are not that. These are individual energy healing sessions because the energies that can be prolonging our healing process are different for everyone. For some people, it's abandonment. For some people, it's anxiety. For some people, it's sadness. For some people, it's grief from the past. And so these individual energy healing sessions can help you to release the stuff that's prolonging this grieving process so that you can start to move forward a lot more quickly. Anything that I offer here, any healing program I offer, it's not meant to completely heal you instantly in one session. It's just meant to help you to move forward much quicker than without this support. Because really, guys, the reason I'm offering these services is because I want to do a lot more than just talk to you about these things. Talking can be helpful, but I want to provide you with real, actual solutions to what you're going through. So that's another reason why I created this program. So you also get 2 guided meditations in this program. One is a very, very deep dive into your subconscious to get to the source of where any of these negative subconscious beliefs you might be carrying around, like that you're not good enough, started. And from there, we go to the source and we shift how you see that. And that's what actually rewires your brain. So then you also get another guided meditation to help cement in some of those shifts that you had from the first guided meditation. And these 2 healing modalities, the reason I've combined them into this program is because these were really the 2 things that helped me to move forward so much easier than some of the other stuff that I was doing. Therapy was helpful, talking to people was helpful, but this stuff took me to the next level and helped me to be able to move forward much more quickly. If you feel like there might be some subconscious stuff going on for you, if you feel like your grieving process has gone on a long time or you're just feeling stuck in it, reach out to me or click on the link in the description to check out the X Detox, and I'll let you know if this would be a good fit for you. So now I want to talk about the gift of grief. So disclaimer here, I am not a person who was like, oh yeah, I'm so glad that I went through all this grief and loss. No, not the case at all. I would have much rather not have gone through that. And I would not wish grief on anyone. I don't want anyone to experience loss and grief. But if you're already going through it, there are some things that can come out of that. There are what I would call some silver linings that can come from the grieving process. Grief can actually be transformative. Have you ever heard the metaphor of when people talk about healing, they talk about a caterpillar going into its cocoon and then emerging as a butterfly. That's kind of what the grieving process does. Grief, it somehow, and I can't say exactly how, but it somehow does transform you. I am not the same person that I was before I went into those toxic relationships and then had to leave them and go through a grieving process. I'm actually a much wiser person, I would say. I'm much more compassionate. I would say that I am much deeper than I was before. Again, these are some of the qualities that I have experienced in my life from going through tremendous experiences of grief and loss. Have you ever heard people say something like, "Oh wow, like he's so deep," or "she's really deep"? Grief gives you a certain depth to your character, to your being, that people actually do find really attractive. Like if you look on some of the dating apps that are out there, people will sometimes say, "I'm looking for someone deep." This is what they mean. When people go through really challenging things, they have this wisdom, they have this compassion that they may not have had otherwise. And so some of the gifts that I have received personally from going through grief is my ability to do this work, my ability to help other people, to truly, truly relate and empathize with some of the things that you all are going through. Like when I'm doing this work and people are telling me the pain that they're in, I can truly say, I have been there. I understand, I know how bad it feels, and I get it. And that can be tremendously healing for other people, to know that they are not alone in their experience. There's other people that have gone through it too, and you can share that with them. And so that's a gift that I've received from going through this. I can relate to people, and I can then help other people and be compassionate to them in their journey. So something else that grief has also given to me is the ability to empathize with people. Like I said, in a way that I really couldn't have before. I could sort of understand what people had experienced on a cognitive level. We could call it like a cognitive empathy. But without going through it myself, I wouldn't really have been able to understand what that was like for other people. So it's brought me the gift of empathy, and it's also brought me some wisdom that I would not have had otherwise. Again, there's something really transformative and spiritual, actually. I could do a whole nother video on the spiritual awakening journey and what that's like. But when you go on this journey of healing, which is essentially a grieving process, there is a wisdom that comes from that. You see things differently. You can actually see things sometimes from a broader perspective, from a more healed and a more whole perspective. And that is something that can serve you for the rest of your life. So again, like I said, I would never wish this grief on anyone, but there are definitely things that I have come to receive from going through grief. So it's not all bad. There are, again, silver linings to this process that can be tremendously healing for you and for other people and for the world, if you want to then share your experience with the world, which is really what I've been doing here. This is truly, you guys, this is the culmination of my healing journey here. Being able to share my experience with all of you and being able to help all of you and anyone who I come in contact with my work, to move forward themselves. So this is a gift to me. So thank you all so much. If you're going through a grieving process and you're feeling a lot of shame about getting into a toxic relationship to begin with, click here for some tips on how to forgive yourself. And if you like the content that I come out with each week about healing from toxic relationships and learning how to love yourself and create healthy relationships, click here to subscribe. I come out with new videos each week.